I never thought my childhood home, the place filled with memories of bike rides in the driveway and summer lemonade on the porch, would one day become the site of a crime scene. But here I am, 35 years old, nursing scars on my ribs and a deep wound on my scalp, still trying to make sense of how my own brother nearly beat me to death over the very house our father worked his whole life to keep. It all started 3 months after Dad died. The grief was still raw, and I'd barely settled into a routine when Daniel and his wife Vanessa arrived at my doorstep, holding legal documents and wearing expressions that didn't match the occasion. Cold, calculated, and businesslike. That was the beginning of the end. Before we go any further, comment where in the world you are watching from, and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. The house on Maple Street had been in our family since before I was born. My dad, James Reynolds, bought it when he married my mom, dreaming of a home filled with laughter and memories. For a while, it was exactly that, until everything cracked apart when I was 8 and Daniel was 10. One day, Mom just left. No goodbye, no note. Just a single suitcase and a one-way trip to California with her yoga instructor. She never looked back. Dad never spoke ill of her. Some people love you the best they know how, he once told me. Sometimes that's not enough, but it doesn't mean we stop being kind. He stepped up in every way, working long hours at the steel plant, cooking dinner, helping with homework, patching scraped knees and broken hearts. He was the anchor, and that house was his harbor. As we grew, Daniel and I took different paths. I stayed close, working part-time jobs to help with bills, eventually landing a stable job as an administrative assistant at a local elementary school. Daniel chased prestige. He went off to a top-tier business school 3 states away and returned wearing tailored suits and impatience. During holiday visits, he'd make remarks like, "Dad, you could sell this place and downsize. Why hang on to all this?" But Dad, ever gentle and stubborn in his own way, would smile and say, "Why trade a home for a house?" Then came Vanessa, beautiful, ambitious, always perfectly dressed. The kind of woman who seemed like she belonged in glossy magazines, not family gatherings. She looked at our worn hardwood floors and vintage light fixtures with barely concealed disdain. "Is this all original?" she asked, poking around during their first visit. "It feels very lived in." They married at a country club so exclusive, Dad and I looked like we were crashing someone else's wedding. While Vanessa's friends posed for Instagram in designer gowns, I stood off to the side sipping watered-down champagne and wondering what had happened to the brother who used to share popsicles with me on this very porch. When Dad was diagnosed with terminal cancer, I moved back into the house without hesitation. I bathed him, fed him, managed medications, and held his hand through the darkest nights. Daniel said all the right things over the phone, but rarely showed up in person. "Big deal going on. Market's too volatile. I'll be there soon." But soon rarely came. 2 weeks before Dad passed, during one lucid morning, he looked at me and said, "Carla, I want you to have the house. You've been here. You know what it means. Daniel, he has his own life now." I promised I'd keep it. The next day, he updated his will. And just like that, the storm began brewing. Daniel arrived for the funeral with Vanessa in tow, both of them dressed like they were attending a business gala. I let myself believe, for one brief moment, that we might find unity in grief. He even put his arm around me at the gravesite. But by the time we were back in the kitchen after the reception, his tone had changed. "We need to talk about the house," he said. I blinked, startled by the timing. "I'm not selling," I told him. "Dad wanted me to keep it." He didn't argue, not yet, but there was a flicker in his eyes that chilled me more than the autumn wind outside. That was the first warning. What I didn't know then was just how far he and Vanessa would go to get what they wanted. Not a negotiation, not a conversation, but a campaign of intimidation, manipulation, and eventually violence. They say funerals bring people together. In some twisted way, I guess that was true. Daniel and I were in the same room for the first time in over a year, standing just a few feet apart, but it felt like we were galaxies away. He wore a tailored black suit, crisp and expensive looking. The kind of thing you wear when you're trying to look appropriately somber without letting your status slip. Vanessa stood beside him in a fitted black dress and oversized sunglasses, as if she were stepping off the pages of Vogue's Chic Widow edition. I'd spent the night before the service in Dad's room, sitting in the chair where I'd kept vigil during his final days. His scent still lingered, Old Spice and something earthy, like warm soil. I was exhausted, emotionally hollowed out, but I'd promised him I'd stay strong. I wore a simple black blouse and the same flats I'd worn to parent-teacher night. No pearls, no designer labels, just grief. At the graveside, Daniel slipped his arm around my shoulders. For a fleeting moment, it felt like childhood again, like we were two siblings holding each other up in the storm. He whispered, "He'd be proud of you." I nodded, not trusting my voice to respond. Vanessa stood slightly behind him, looking bored, her gaze darting toward her watch. Back at the house, we hosted a small reception, coffee, cookies, and quiet murmurs of condolences from neighbors and a few extended family members. I tried to be present, but the numbness had returned, a fog I couldn't shake. I found myself washing dishes just to keep moving. That's when Daniel cornered me in the kitchen. He leaned against the counter, arms folded, face unreadable. "We should talk about the house." I blinked. "The house?" He gave a small nod. "Yeah, market's up. It would sell fast." I felt my spine stiffen. "I'm not selling, Daniel. Dad wanted me to keep it." A flicker. Something dark passed across his face. But then he smiled, or something close to it. "We'll discuss it later," he said and walked out before I could reply. I stood frozen, hands damp with dish soap, heart thudding in my chest. 3 days later, we met at the office of Lloyd Peterson, Dad's longtime attorney and lifelong friend. His office smelled like old paper and pipe tobacco, and the bookshelves behind him were lined with faded legal volumes and family photos. He greeted us with a kind smile and offered coffee, which Vanessa declined with a tight shake of her head. "Your father was a good man," Lloyd began. He was clear about his wishes. He opened a thick folder, the pages already marked with yellow tabs. As per his will, the house on Maple Street is to be transferred to Carla Reynolds, with a stipulation. Vanessa shifted in her seat, crossing her legs and raising one immaculately groomed eyebrow. Lloyd continued, "Carla is to retain ownership, but she is to pay Daniel Reynolds his share of the property's assessed value, interest-free, over a period of 5 years. Daniel's jaw clenched. He didn't speak, but I saw it, the flicker, the storm just under the surface. The remainder of James's estate, his savings account and liquid assets, are to be divided equally between both children. Silence hung in the room like smoke. Lloyd looked up, glasses perched low on his nose. "Are there any questions?" Daniel's voice was calm, too calm. "Is there any provision for selling the house instead?" Lloyd shook his head. "Your father expressed a clear preference that Carla retain the home. But once the transfer is complete, legally she may choose to sell it if she wishes. That decision rests with her." Daniel nodded slowly, stealing a glance at Vanessa. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod, like a commander giving permission to strike. "Well," Daniel said, voice syrupy, "that seems fair." I didn't believe him for a second. We signed the papers. Vanessa barely looked at me. Daniel thanked Lloyd, shook his hand with a firm grip that looked more performative than sincere, and suggested we grab lunch to talk things over. I was so tired, and for a moment I thought maybe he was trying. Maybe we could have some sort of truce. We went to Antonio's, the family-run Italian place Dad loved. The owner, Sal, hugged me at the door and offered his condolences. Vanessa looked like she was doing mental calculations about how many calories were in marinara sauce. Daniel made small talk, asked about my work, mentioned some real estate trends, and brought up interest rates. I ate in silence, waiting for the pitch. And sure enough, it came with the coffee. "I've been thinking," he said. "You could take out a small mortgage on the house, just enough to buy me out now. That way you don't have to make payments over 5 years, and I can move forward with some other plans." I stared at him. Dad didn't want me to take out a mortgage. "It's just numbers, Carla. The house is paid off. You'd still be ahead." Vanessa chimed in, finally lowering her fork. "Sentimentality is expensive. The house is basically a vintage fixer-upper. We're trying to help you be realistic." "I'm not selling," I said, "and I'm not mortgaging Dad's house." Daniel's smile faded. "Just think about it." The rest of the lunch was quiet. Vanessa didn't speak again. Daniel tapped on his phone. That night, I sat at Dad's desk and reread the letter he'd left me in his final week, words scrawled in shaky penmanship. Carla, this house isn't just wood and brick. It's where we survived, where we laughed, where we held on. Keep it, not because I said so, but because you understand why it matters. I folded the letter and placed it in the top drawer. I knew then that Daniel's fight hadn't even started yet. But neither had mine. The calls started a week after our lunch at Antonio's. At first, they were polite, tense, but polite. "Hey, Carla," Daniel's voice said on my voicemail one afternoon, just checking in. "Wanted to see if you've given any more thought to what we discussed. No pressure, just keeping things moving, you know?" I didn't call back. A few days later, another message, this time less casual. "I mean, I just think it's unnecessary to drag things out. 5 years is a long time, Carla. We could both simplify this." Simplify, that was his word for bulldozing through our father's wishes and rewriting the terms to suit his convenience. The messages kept coming, texts too. Still no word? Just trying to resolve things like adults. "You're being incredibly difficult." I ignored them all. Then came the family calls. Aunt Susan called one evening. She sounded hesitant, like she didn't really want to have the conversation, but felt obligated. "Sweetheart, I talked to Daniel. He said you're refusing to sell the house." "I'm keeping the house," I replied carefully. "It's what Dad wanted." "Well, sure," she said, "but I guess what he's saying is you convinced your dad to change the will while he was sick, not in his right mind." I felt like someone had thrown ice water down my spine. "That's not true." "I'm just saying what I heard," she said quickly. "Vanessa told me she's worried. Said you've been acting erratic, withdrawing from people." "I was caring for a dying man for 3 years," I snapped. "Forgive me for not hosting tea parties." She mumbled something and hung up soon after. Next came Uncle Robert, then a distant cousin. Then a Facebook message from Elaine, whom I hadn't seen since high school graduation. "You should do the right thing. Family is more important than property." Property. That word kept coming up, like the house was just a thing, a transaction. A unit of real estate instead of a home, soaked in the memories of our childhood, our father's laughter, our family dinners, and our grief. And through all of it, Daniel's messages persisted, now with sharper edges. "You're being selfish. You're holding up my future. You want me to wait 5 years while you live for free in a 4-bedroom house?" I started to dread the sound of my phone. The vibration in my pocket triggered low-grade panic. I stopped going on social media. Vanessa was tagging herself at charity events and exclusive brunches, always in designer clothes, always smiling like nothing was crumbling around her. One photo showed her lounging at a rooftop bar with the caption, "Manifesting abundance sparkles." I wanted to throw my phone across the room. Then, one Friday evening, my cousin Patrick called from the city. His voice was low, cautious. "I thought you should know. Daniel and Vanessa are in serious financial trouble." I leaned against the kitchen. "Counter, how serious?" "I overheard something at James Morton's retirement party. They're underwater on that luxury condo, bought at peak, and now the market's dipping." "And Vanessa's spending?" I guessed. Patrick sighed. 6 figures in credit card debt, Carla. Trips, handbags, spa weekends. Daniel tried covering it up with crypto investments. All of it failed. I closed my eyes. It all made sense now. The sudden urgency, the pressure, the desperation behind Daniel's "let's just be practical" tone. "He's spiraling," Patrick said, "and Vanessa's not helping." That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, the shadows from the streetlight casting harsh lines across the old plaster. Every creak in the floorboard sounded like footsteps. I started wondering if Daniel might show up unannounced again. The next morning, I found a glossy flyer tucked in the mailbox. "Looking to sell? We have buyers waiting for your neighborhood." I wouldn't have thought twice, except this one had my address pre-filled on the back. My address. I called the number on the flyer. The agent sounded confused at first, then apologetic. "I was told the owner was open to selling," she said. "I previewed the property last week." "Who let you in?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "A man named Daniel, said he had a key." I hung up and went straight to the hardware store. That afternoon, I changed every lock in the house. Then I called my attorney, Jessica Reyes, and had her draft a cease and desist letter. Daniel didn't respond directly, but the next voicemail he left was colder. You changed the locks? Are you serious? This isn't just your house, Carla. I own half the value. I have a right to see it. No, Daniel, I whispered to the empty room. You have a right to money, not to terrorize me in my own home. Still, the pressure didn't stop. In fact, it escalated. Late night calls, new numbers, blocked IDs. Sometimes he'd call and just breathe. Other times he left long voicemails, rambling about Dad's favoritism, how he always got second best, how I was always coddled. Dad always gave you everything, he hissed in one message. You didn't earn it. You clung to him because you had nothing else. You still have nothing else. I saved every message. Jessica advised me to keep a log, so I did. Every call, every flyer, every incident. Then Vanessa messaged me. Family should support each other. Daniel deserves better than this treatment. She had the audacity to send a second message 2 days later. This could have been resolved peacefully, but you made it ugly. I blocked her number. That weekend, I caught a man in a suit watching the house from across the street. When I approached, he got in his car and drove off. 2 days later, I noticed the front gate was slightly open. I always shut it behind me. Always. Inside, a few things were out of place. Nothing stolen, just shifted. Moved. A vase angled differently, a cabinet door left ajar, a light left on in the attic. I felt violated. That night, I called Thomas, my neighbor and a retired police officer. He didn't hesitate. I'll keep watch, he said. And if I see him, I'll do more than watch. I didn't doubt him. Still, I started sleeping with a baseball bat beside my bed. Every night, I walked the perimeter of the house, checking doors, testing windows. My sleep came in fragments. I'd jerk awake at the sound of passing cars or raccoons in the trash bins. I stopped inviting friends over. The house felt poisoned, like a war zone dressed up as a home. But I wouldn't leave. Not because of stubbornness, not because of pride, because I had made a promise to the man who raised me, who taught me that home wasn't just where you live, it's where you stand your ground. Daniel wanted me to surrender, but I was learning, slowly, painfully, that sometimes holding the line is the only way to survive, even when it means standing alone. I used to feel safe in this house. That feeling had always been there, tucked into the corners like the scent of my dad's aftershave or the creak of the stairs that always gave away a midnight snack run. But now, even in the silence of early mornings, even with the doors locked and lights on, there was a buzz under my skin, like the house itself was warning me. Something's coming. It started small, subtle. One evening after work, I pulled into the driveway and noticed a car idling across the street. Black, tinted windows, no plates visible from the front. At first, I figured it was a rideshare driver or someone waiting for a friend. But when I turned off my headlights, the car pulled away slowly, too slowly, and disappeared down Maple Street. I wanted to believe it was coincidence, but my gut disagreed. A few days later, I came home and immediately felt off. I couldn't explain it. Nothing looked broken, no signs of forced entry. But there was this strange stillness, like the house had been disturbed and was waiting for me to notice. It wasn't until I walked into the living room that I spotted it. A business card. It was tucked neatly under the vase on the coffee table, one I kept filled with fresh flowers from the backyard. Oak and Pine Realty, we sell fast. The name on the card was unfamiliar, but when I called the number, the woman on the other end sounded startled. Oh, yes, I walked the property last week. Your brother Daniel showed me around. Said you were considering listing. I wasn't, I said, my voice like ice. She stammered. I apologize. I thought you were out of town. I hung up. My hands were shaking as I dug through the hall closet. There, behind the winter coats, was the old key box Dad used to keep. Empty. Daniel must have made a copy. I didn't call him. I didn't want to hear his voice. Didn't want to listen to some smug excuse about how he had a right to check on his investment. Instead, I called the locksmith, again. They installed new deadbolts, new window latches, reinforced strike plates. I added a video doorbell and motion lights, then moved a chair under the back window in case I needed to climb out fast. I wasn't sleeping well, my appetite disappeared. I started leaving the hallway lights on at night, like a child afraid of the dark. Except I wasn't afraid of the dark. I was afraid of him. 2 nights later, I woke to the sound of metal scratching against metal. I froze. My eyes snapped open in the dark, heart pounding. The front door handle was rattling. I grabbed my phone, crawled to the window, and peeked through the blinds. Daniel's car, parked at the curb. I stayed silent. Whoever it was left after a few minutes. But the next morning, I found deep gouges around the deadbolt, like someone had been testing it. I filed a police report. They took notes, nodded, promised to look into it. But without a video, without a direct threat, their hands were tied. "This is family stuff," one officer said. "It gets tricky." Tricky. What a polite word for psychological warfare. Alicia, my best friend, was furious when I told her. "This isn't sibling tension, Carla. This is harassment. Stalking. You need legal protection." She gave me the number of a lawyer who specialized in family court and restraining orders, Jessica Reyes. Jessica was sharp, calm, and didn't blink once as I laid everything out. Texts, voicemails, the real estate stunt, the car outside, the scratched door, the fake showings. "We can file for a protective order," she said, "but judges can be cautious with family disputes unless there's physical evidence of violence or a clear threat." "So I have to wait until he hits me?" I asked, my voice brittle. Jessica's eyes didn't flinch. "No, but we need to build a strong case, document everything, save every message, install cameras if you haven't already, build a timeline. The more patterns we show, the better." So I started logging everything. Day by day, line by line. April 12th, Daniel calls at 1:42 a.m. leaves voicemail. "If you think you can ignore me forever, you're wrong." April 14th, Vanessa emails, "Your behavior is hurting this family. Be smart. Sell the house." April 16th, neighbor reports seeing a man checking window locks in broad daylight. April 18th, found another flyer for real estate appraisal, this one tucked under my windshield wiper at work. By the end of April, the log was 12 pages long. Then came the incident at my job. Daniel and Vanessa showed up. Unannounced, uninvited, at the front office of the elementary school where I worked. Vanessa was dressed like she was heading to court. Tailored blouse, pearls, red lipstick like war paint. Daniel looked tense, suit wrinkled, eyes twitching. They asked to speak to the principal. When the secretary told them I was unavailable, Vanessa made a scene. "She needs help," she said, loudly enough for teachers and parents in the lobby to hear. "She's not mentally stable. Her father was manipulated. We're concerned." Daniel just stood behind her, arms folded. My coworker texted me from the break room. "Your brother and his wife are here. It's bad." I called the principal later that night, trying to explain. To her credit, she was understanding. "I believe you," she said, "but it's starting to affect your presence at work. Is there anything we can do to support you?" I thanked her, then cried in my car for 20 minutes. The next day, my neighbor Thomas caught me at the mailbox. "Carla," he said, voice low, "I saw a man on your porch yesterday, tall, dark jacket, expensive-looking shoes. He was testing the windows. I was walking the dog and called out. He took off around the side yard and got in a car down the street." My stomach turned to stone. "That was Daniel," I said. Thomas narrowed his eyes. "You want me to start keeping a record?" I nodded. He handed me a slip of paper. "His cell number. Anything happens, day or night, you call me." That night, I ordered 2 more cameras, one for the backyard, one for the hallway. I changed my routine, parked down the block, used the back entrance, never left lights off completely. I stopped using headphones. I scanned every aisle at the grocery store, every row at the gas station. It was exhausting. And worst of all, it was invisible. I couldn't prove fear. Couldn't measure dread. Couldn't show anyone the damage being done to my peace. But I could feel it. In my muscles, my sleep, my chest which tightened every time my phone buzzed. Still, I didn't move out. I couldn't. Because this was my house. My father's house. And Daniel would not scare me out of it. So I stayed. And I watched. And I waited. But even I didn't know just how far he would go next. The morning had that rare kind of calm I used to crave. Soft sunlight filtering through the curtains, coffee brewing on the counter, and the faint hum of the neighborhood waking up. None of it felt peaceful anymore. It was like the calm before the storm. I was on the porch, wrapped in a sweater over my pajamas and cradling a mug of dark coffee when the doorbell rang. The chime echoed so loud it jolted me out of that foggy comfort. I checked the security feed on my phone. Daniel and Vanessa, together. There was a poised menace in how they stood there, Vanessa leaning slightly forward, her eyes hidden behind designer sunglasses. I hesitated, then latched the chain before crack opening the door. Daniel's voice was gentle, deceptively calm. "We just want to talk, please." Vanessa tilted her head, cold smile in place, eyes sharp. I opened the door enough to keep it chained, defensive but polite. "Talk," I said, voice steady, but at a distance. They stepped in anyway. Vanessa's heels clicked on the hardwood. She surveyed the living room with cold curiosity. "You've rearranged things," she observed. "The sofa used to be against that wall." I said nothing. Daniel gestured toward the dining table, still stained with dark cedar from breakfast. "Can we sit? Just a few minutes." I hesitated, then unlatched the chain. Against every instinct, I led them to the table. Daniel pulled out a folder, thick with paper. Inside was a mortgage agreement already filled out. It proposed I take out a loan on the house, 70% of its current value, so he could be paid his share immediately. My breath caught. "That's not fair," I said. "You want me to mortgage a paid-off house just so we can settle now?" Daniel forced a smile. Vanessa leaned forward, that same icy calm. "This is better than dragging it out. You keep the house. You just do it with some financial help from the bank." I couldn't think. This was my home, not a spreadsheet. I stood. "I'm not signing," my words thick. In a blur, Daniel's mask slipped. He knocked his chair back. It crashed to the floor. His voice dropped low, dangerous. He lunged, grabbing my hair in a clump and my arm like a vice. Everything spun. The crystal dining set, the old family photos, the coffee cups left on the table. I hit the wall behind me. A picture frame shattered at my feet. My cheek met glass. Pain and fear exploded. I crumpled. He stood over me and kicked the side of my rib, then again. I curled into a ball, gasping for breath, trying to stop the world from spinning. "Sign," he spat, "or I'll break every bone in your body." Tears blurred my vision. Blood pooled beneath me. Behind me, Vanessa's voice cut cold. "Do it, Daniel. End her." I saw her then. Standing like a statue, watching. No hesitation, no empathy, just unyielding cruelty. The woman who, for all appearances, was my sister-in-law. I thought, my brother, my protector, this is not you. I closed my eyes, bracing for the blow I didn't know would come next. That's when I heard it, a voice that refused to let me break. "Stop! Police!" The door burst open and Thomas, my neighbor, retired cop, stood there with phone held high, recording. His voice was calm but fierce. Daniel froze. Vanessa's smile cracked. Thomas moved in. "Put it down," he said to Daniel. "I've called 911. I've recorded everything." Daniel's voice shifted dramatically, pleading. "This isn't what it looks like. She attacked us first." Thomas didn't lower the phone. "Save that for the officers." Sirens wailed in the distance. Daniel surrendered. Slowly, intentionally, Vanessa began to sob, but it seemed like an act. They were arrested. Daniel struggled against the officers. Vanessa continued crying performance. I lay on the floor, blood warm beneath me, lights flickering, sirens closing in. When the paramedics arrived and the detectives came, I barely recognized any of it. Names were taken, statements recorded, evidence sealed. I woke in the hospital hours later, my body hurting in ways I couldn't fathom. Shattered ribs, a head wound that had been stapled, and the dull ache that comes when trauma drills into your bones. But I lived. In that moment, despite the pain, I knew one thing. My home had been violated, my blood spilled on those floors, but it was still mine. And they would not take it from me, not like that. I never thought I would willingly walk into a courtroom to relive the worst moments of my life. But there I was, sitting in a wheelchair, supported by crutches, face bruised, eyes dull but alert. The courthouse smelled of polished wood and stale coffee, and the murmurs of the clerk's office sounded distant, like they were coming from another world. This one didn't belong to me. It had been 3 weeks since the attack, and forensic photos lined the walls of the precinct. My statement was written on pages thick with my own tears. Thomas's video sat, waiting in an evidence envelope, a cold record of violence on hardwood. Detective Marshall was the one who broke the silence first, leading me from holding cell to witness stand. Even after everything I'd endured, I felt all of me trembling. The courtroom was hushed. Vanessa sat to my left, pristine in black, looking like someone wore grief for fashion. Daniel was on the other side. His suit was rumpled, eyes darting. Neither looked at me. Lloyd Peterson, representing the prosecution, began, "Miss Reynolds, can you describe the day you were attacked?" My voice trembled, but the details came. Daniel asked me to sign a mortgage agreement to pay him his share immediately. When I refused, he lunged, threw me against the wall, and kicked me repeatedly. Vanessa's voice echoed in my ears. "Do it, Daniel. End her." As I spoke, I felt the floor beneath that dining table, my head smashing into the wall, my breath shuddering out. I heard my own voice, as though distant, telling every juror why truth mattered. Then the video played. Thomas's recording began during the assault. The struggle, the scream, the boots hitting my ribs, the tossed vase, Vanessa's command, then Thomas's voice. "Stop! Police are on the way!" The room went still, except for thumbnails tapping the edge of the desk and the soft hum of the projector. I could see them, their actions, unfiltered, and all I wanted was for someone to see what I had seen so that justice could breathe. Witnesses followed. Thomas, steady and unwavering, recounted how he witnessed the attack and captured every second on video. Patrick described Daniel's frantic, sorrow-stricken calls in recent months, desperate pleas for money, manipulative whispers about family betrayal. A coworker testified that Vanessa had harassed me at school, calling me unstable in front of colleagues. Finally, the legal facts were laid bare. Aggravated assault, classic second degree, attacking someone in their home with intention to cause serious bodily harm. In many states, that carries up to 15 years in prison, fines, and probation. Lawinfo.com. Attempted coercion, threatening violent harm to force another into signing property, signing over the house, is a serious felony on its own. Now in this courtroom, prosecutors painted the picture. A premeditated assault escalated from entitlement to violent coercion. When the defense attorney stood, his words curled like smoke. He accused me of instigating. "She pushed them into a corner," he said. "Daniel broke down under pressure." Vanessa's lawyer suggested she feared for her safety and simply reacted. But they couldn't undo the video. They couldn't erase my broken ribs or the hospital records. And when the judge reviewed text records, threatening messages, the reoccurring "sell the house" mantra, it became impossible to argue that this was anything but a violent breakdown of a family relationship. Verdict day. The gallery was packed, hands clenched, eyes red. The judge, his hair gray, posture stern, addressed the court. He spoke of betrayal masquerading as business, of a home violated, of trust shattered. He quoted sentencing guidelines and case law. A typical conviction for aggravated assault of this severity might mean 10 to 15 years in prison, especially with evidence of deliberate harm and planning. Federal Bureau of Investigation. Lawinfo.com. He sentenced Daniel, 8 years in state prison, counting time served during trial. Vanessa, 3 years, recognizing a lesser but still complicit role as instigator and accessory. He also issued permanent restraining orders, barring them both from contacting or approaching me. When the gavel hit, I didn't gasp. Instead, I felt everything go numb. I wasn't elated. I was drained but relieved. When I walked out weeks later, the sun felt different, brighter, maybe even forgiving. But I still carried weight, physical pain, emotional scars, and the quiet reverberations of betrayal by the one I trusted most. Despite it all, justice had come. It didn't erase my pain, but it acknowledged it, and that acknowledgement breathed a fragment of dignity back into me. I woke up in a hospital room. White walls, the beeping of machines, and the sterile scent of antiseptic. For a moment, I couldn't remember where I was. Then the memories rushed back. The kick to my ribs, the fall, Vanessa's voice urging Daniel to end me, the roar of sirens, Thomas standing over me with his phone held high. That moment of intrusion had saved my life. I spent 4 days there, Staples in my scalp, bruises blooming like dark petals across my torso, fractured ribs. Nerve damage made my left hand weak. I dropped my water glass more than once, the sound echoing in the quiet room like a confession. I learned how fragile healing is. The doctor told me to expect weeks of pain, possibly longer if complications arose. She warned of PTSD, of nightmares, of triggers that could be relentless. The trauma wasn't just physical. My bones healed, but the ache in my chest from betrayal didn't fade so easily. Once I was discharged, Alicia, my unwavering friend, drove me to her apartment. She set me up on her pull-out couch, arranging pillows just right, placing heating pads within reach. Friends brought groceries. Neighbors dropped by with casseroles and sympathetic smiles. In the days that followed, the nightmares were the worst. I'd wake drenched in sweat, heart pounding, still feeling the force of Daniel's boots pressing into my back. And every unexpected sound, footsteps in the hallway, a car door slamming, made me recoil, as if braced for attack. At my first follow-up appointment, the doctor handed over her most compassionate look. "You're showing all the signs of acute stress. With time and support, you can heal, but many survivors develop PTSD. It's not a failure. It's trauma's voice asking to be heard." She recommended I start seeing a trauma specialist. Dr. Olivia Chin was warm, patient, and spoke with a gentle authority. In our first session, I handed her Daniel's voicemails and the messages that made my blood freeze. Sitting with them felt like opening a wound, but she helped me start naming what had happened. Not betrayal, not a broken family, but violation. She explained that art could be a bridge where words failed. Creating something from pain isn't avoidance, it's expression. It helps process trauma held in the body, not just the mind. And so I started drawing again. I didn't know the first thing about art therapy, but I began by reopening a sketchbook I'd abandoned in college. With shaking hands, I drew the shape of the house, not the layout. I drew memories, my dad gardening, summer sunlight streaming through the porch windows, the way he made me laugh. I added layers of color, sunny yellow, nurturing green, then slashes of crimson where I remembered pain. Each stroke was awkward, shaming, but necessary. Over weeks, I joined a local art therapy group, 6 women, each with stories I felt reluctant to ask about. We painted, we colored with clay, we created mandalas, circles that felt protective and grounding. The art therapist guided us through metaphor. If the house were a tree, how rooted do you feel? What forces uprooted it? I painted a tree whose roots glowed gold, buried deep in soil. Its top was ragged, but the roots held steady. Science says art therapy works. It can lower blood pressure, reduce anxiety, and help survivors process trauma through nonverbal expression. The American Art Therapy Association confirms it increases self-esteem, emotional regulation, and well-being. It helps us name what words cannot. One night, I dreamt I was back in the dining room. Suddenly, I painted a version on canvas, blood-red acrylics forming a halo around the table, blue light pooling at the edges. Staring at it later, I said aloud, "I still feel marked. But I made this. I control this memory." It was the first time I felt power as well as pain. Physical healing continued alongside this emotional journey. I attended physical therapy for my hand and ribs. My body relearned basic motions: twisting, lifting, bending. The rib pain didn't disappear overnight, but with yoga, which my therapist approved, I began breathing deeper again, as if coaxing life back into my chest. At home, I transformed Dad's dusty backyard workshop into a shared studio. I invited neighbors and friends to help. Thomas helped run electrical. Mark, the architect I was growing close to, helped hang shelves and lights. We painted the walls light blue, like a calming sky. For the first time in months, I wasn't crying during the setup, just working, planning, creating. I turned the art room into a sanctuary, not just for me, but for others. I started Art for Healing classes, free sessions at the local community center, where I taught art to children from the school where I used to work. We painted houses and trees, we drew our families, and the room hummed with quiet joy. In sessions, when a girl smiled up at me and said, "I drew my home the way I want it to be," I realized creating new meaning was healing. It wasn't fast. There were setbacks. Nights when I couldn't sleep, when a stranger's laugh sent me spiraling, when I looked in the mirror and didn't recognize the person staring back. But Dr. Chen would say healing is not erasing, it's building something new around the ruins. I started attending a trauma survivor support group. Sitting in that circle, I heard stories of loss and survival, and I wasn't alone. We shared ways to cope, ways to stand, ways to paint, write, rebuild. On a late afternoon in spring, I painted the house as I remembered it on sunny days. Golden light, lavender flowers, Dad's tire swing hanging from the oak tree. I hung it in my new studio. It didn't remove the darkness, but it glowed with possibility. As summer came, I invited volunteers to staff our first art therapy pop-up workshops. We met in the community center's multi-purpose room. We had watercolors, clay, journals, and blank canvases. Survivors came tentatively. Some cried, some stared at the clean page, unsure. Slowly, with encouragement, they painted. Shared stories, found solidarity. I found it healing in a way I didn't know existed. One evening, while packing up after a session, I stumbled on another letter in Dad's handwriting. Hidden in a drawer, it read, "My dear kids, you both came from the same place of love. Choose peace. Let your journey reflect what we hold in our hearts, not just what's on our land." I closed the letter, chest tight with emotion. I'd followed his path, not just holding the land, but building something lasting, somewhere love, healing, and art could live. In the yard, under the oak tree, I planted a small garden as a memorial. Lavender, Dad's favorite, roses, and a fountain whose gentle burble felt familiar, like a laugh in water. I painted a bench. In memory, words unspoken live here. The first time I sat on it, I didn't cry, I just breathed. By fall, I was moving forward. I sold the Maple Street house, finally, for a price close to Dad's estimated value. The new owners were a young family, 2 little kids and hopeful eyes. I left them a letter, not loved with secrets or violence, but cherished. I described the holidays, the treehouse, the summer sunlight on the porch. I left space out. The darker memories belonged only to me. I moved into a small bungalow near the school. It was tiny, cozy, familiar. The kitchen cabinets were warm wood and cheerful colors. It wasn't about staying close to what was lost, but about being grounded in what's gained. I named the address of the new house, Safe. My life here didn't have space for shadows, only for light. And then Mark, architect, neighbor, friend, stayed. He watched me repaint the living room with me, small brushes and bigger care. We didn't speak of sirens or trials or shattered trust, only of color, structure, home. When he held my hand, I didn't flinch. One night, months later, after a gallery showing at the community center for art therapy participants, a child reached out and said, "Will you come paint at my house next time?" I've made a new tree house too. I smiled, tears unthreatened this time, because here it was, art is action, home is healing, rebuilding is purpose. As summer came, I invited volunteers to staff our first art therapy pop-up workshops. We met in the community center's multi-purpose room. We had watercolors, clay, journals, and blank canvases. Survivors came tentatively. Some cried, some stared at the clean page, unsure. Slowly, with encouragement, they painted. Shared stories, found solidarity. I found it healing in a way I didn't know existed. One evening, while packing up after a session, I stumbled on another letter in Dad's handwriting. Hidden in a drawer, it read, "My dear kids, you both came from the same place of love. Choose peace. Let your journey reflect what we hold in our hearts, not just what's on our land." I closed the letter, chest tight with emotion. I'd followed his path, not just holding the land, but building something lasting, somewhere love, healing, and art could live. In the yard, under the oak tree, I planted a small garden as a memorial. Lavender, Dad's favorite, roses, and a fountain whose gentle burble felt familiar, like a laugh in water. I painted a bench. In memory, words unspoken live here. The first time I sat on it, I didn't cry, I just breathed. By fall, I was moving forward. I sold the Maple Street house, finally, for a price close to Dad's estimated value. The new owners were a young family, 2 little kids and hopeful eyes. I left them a letter, not loved with secrets or violence, but cherished. I described the holidays, the treehouse, the summer sunlight on the porch. I left space out. The darker memories belonged only to me. I moved into a small bungalow near the school. It was tiny, cozy, familiar. The kitchen cabinets were warm wood and cheerful colors. It wasn't about staying close to what was lost, but about being grounded in what's gained. I named the address of the new house, Safe. My life here didn't have space for shadows, only for light. And then Mark, architect, neighbor, friend, stayed. He watched me repaint the living room with me, small brushes and bigger care. We didn't speak of sirens or trials or shattered trust, only of color, structure, home. When he held my hand, I didn't flinch. One night, months later, after a gallery showing at the Community Center for Art Therapy participants, a child reached out and said, "Will you come paint at my house next time? I've made a new tree house too." I smiled, tears unthreatened this time, because here it was. Art as action, home as healing, rebuilding as purpose. Family doesn't mean safety. Sometimes the deepest wounds come from those closest to you. Honor can't be forced. Carla kept her father's promise, even when the cost was betrayal, pain, and near death. Survival isn't enough. Rebuilding is the real victory. Healing means reclaiming your life, one brave decision at a time. Trauma doesn't define you. Your choices do. What was meant to destroy Carla became the foundation of something meaningful. If Amira's story resonated with you, if you've ever had to walk away from the people who were supposed to love you the most, leave a comment below. Share your truth. Let someone else feel less alone. Don't forget to hit the like button if this story moved you, and subscribe for more powerful, honest stories about healing, boundaries, and breaking cycles. Every week, we bring you a new episode based on real experiences, told with raw emotion and zero sugarcoating. And remember, you are allowed to outgrow people, even if they're family, especially if they're family. See you in the next one.